It's time for the All-Pro and Awards show. I'm going to be going through my entire All-Pro roster, first and second team, and then we'll finish it up with MVP, Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year, and Coach of the Year. These are based off of my film study. I'm not going to just be deferring to the stats. A lot of times the stats do align with what happens on tape, but I'm not just going to follow it blindly. And I'm actually going to go in reverse order, starting with the safeties. There were 3 positions this year that I just had the hardest time deciding between. Safety and cornerback are 2 of them, but my first safety is going to be Kyle Hamilton. He just does everything that you could possibly imagine from the safety position at a high level. He's smart and instinctive in zone coverage. He can man up tight ends and receivers. He's a really effective pass rusher. He comes into the box and defends the run, sheds blocks like a linebacker. The ability to play so many different positions and roles at a high level makes him, to me, the most valuable safety in the NFL, and we use the term Swiss Army knife a lot. He is the definition of that. The second safety spot is where it got really tough, deciding between Jesse Bates and Antoine Winfield Jr. Jesse Bates, it seems like, makes a game-changing play in coverage every other week. He was pretty clearly the best free agency signing, unless I'm missing someone obvious. Just an immediate upgrade to the Falcons' passing defense, but he also defends the run at a high level. But I decided to go with Antoine Winfield Jr., kind of because he was snubbed from the Pro Bowl. I'm going to give him his credit here in the All-Pro. Even though they're different players stylistically, he's similar to Kyle Hamilton in the sense that he just impacts every aspect of the game. He's rangy playing the middle of the field, he's an excellent run defender, and he was the most productive pass rushing safety in the NFL this year with 17 pressures and 5 sacks. He also added 5 forced fumbles onto that. He doesn't give up many plays in coverage, actually allowed his first touchdown of the year in week 17, and he's been one of the best safeties in the NFL for most of his career and just doesn't get that much credit in terms of awards and national recognition. All right, the second insanely difficult position group is cornerback. There's so many guys that I think you could make an argument for, but the best cornerback in the NFL this year, in my opinion, is Sauce Gardner. I did a full video breaking down why I think he's the best cornerback in the NFL. You should definitely check that out. But it's not only that he doesn't give up any plays, you watch him snap after snap, he pretty much never lets receivers get open. In today's NFL, there's really no such thing as a lockdown corner. Sauce Gardner's the closest thing we have to that. He doesn't have elite ball production, 9 pass breakups, 0 interceptions, but he hardly ever gets targeted, and to me, the ability to shut down an entire side of the field is almost just as valuable and even more impressive than catching a bunch of interceptions. The Jets defense as a whole has been pretty up and down, but he's the one consistent standard on that team. My second corner is going to be Jalen Johnson for the Chicago Bears. He's just such a well-rounded corner that does everything at a high level. He's got 6 pass breakups, 4 interceptions on the season. He's allowing the 3rd lowest yards per cover snap of any corner since 2015. He gave up 1 touchdown in week 8 where it was like a mesh concept and he couldn't work over the traffic over the middle of the field. But outside of that, it's been pretty much flawless tape. And for a player that only had 1 interception in his first 3 seasons, it's great timing to come down with 4 of them in a contract year. Now, I said cornerback was a difficult position. That's kind of on 2 fronts. There were a few guys I wanted to include on the second team, but there just weren't enough spots. And then the 3rd spot for the first team was also a tough choice between Deron Bland and Charvarius Ward. Since the 3rd spot is technically for slot corners, and Deron Bland is a slot that's being forced to play outside because Trayvon Diggs is injured, I went with Deron Bland on my first team. He set the pick 6 record this year. He also had 2 other interceptions and 6 pass breakups. He's nowhere near as consistent as the other 2 guys in terms of snap-to-snap coverage, but I do think the national narrative around Deron Bland is kind of distorted based on the fact that there were 2 games that people were paying attention to him. Leading up to the Thanksgiving game against Washington, he was getting a bunch of interceptions, but he was also pretty good in coverage. He ranked near the top of the league in yards per cover snap, as in not allowing many yards. The Cowboys play a good amount of man coverage, and he wasn't getting beat that often. And then the Washington game, he gives up 8 receptions for 110 yards, but then he sets the pick 6 record at the end of the game. And then the Cowboys' next game was Thursday night against the Seahawks, where he had probably the worst game of his career. 8 receptions, 169 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and then he also had a really nice interception. So a lot of people got this idea about Deron Bland that he's just a gambler that's lucking into a bunch of interceptions and in result giving up a ton of yards. He's not this elite pure cover corner, but he's not like a scrub, and it just seems like there's a lot of people that aren't giving him the credit he deserves. And on this entire list, if I could make a spot for one more player on the first team, team, it would be Charvarius Ward. He leads the NFL in pass breakups. He's got 5 interceptions, but when you look at the level of competition that he's doing this against, it makes it even more impressive. I'm not going to break down all the second team guys this in depth, but I do think Charvarius Ward deserves a closer look. He shut down DK Metcalf. He gave up a couple plays, but I think decisively won his matchup with AJ Brown, the Steelers receivers in week 1. He won that matchup. His ability to be disruptive at the line of scrimmage, quickly flip his hips, transition down the field, and then turn back around and play the football is as good as it gets in the NFL. He's always been like a quality starting cornerback, probably in the high-end cornerback 2 tier, but this year he's taken his play to a completely different level, and he's one of the more underrated reasons for the 49ers' success. And then I've also got L'Jarius Sneed on the second team, another Pro Bowl snub. He's really picked up his level of play towards the end of the season. His matchup with Stephon Diggs in week 14 is one of the most lopsided cornerback receiver one-on-one matchups that I've watched this year. He pretty much shut down Jamar Chase. Overall, he's been one of the better corners since he came into the league, and this is actually his first year not giving up a touchdown. I hate leaving Patrick Surtain off this list. He's played well enough to make it, but I am going to stick with a slot cornerback and go with Trent McDuffie. He's the poster child for stats not telling the whole story. Only 1 pass breakup, 0 interceptions on the season, but you watch him every snap. The coverage is so tight. He's one of the better run defending corners in the league and absolutely deserves to be an all-pro. For linebacker, I'm going with Roquan Smith on my first team, one of the better cover linebackers in the NFL. The way he started the season, I actually thought he had a chance to overtake Fred Warner as linebacker 1. He kind of cooled off from that insane level of play, but still enough to be on my first team, and he finished the season with one of the best interceptions you'll ever see against Miami. His one weakness is that he still doesn't really shed blocks. He has to kind of avoid them, and that can be a risky game in run defense. And then my second linebacker is Fred Warner, adding another great season to what is probably going to be a Hall of Fame career. I feel like this is going to be a pretty common linebacker duo for all pro. Fred Warner just does everything that you could want from the linebacker position. He's got elite coverage range. He reads the play instantly, sheds blocks, misses some tackles occasionally, but overall he's definitely a plus as a run defender. For my second team, I'm going with Quincy Williams for the New York Jets. Led all linebackers with 77 defensive stops. The next highest was 63, and then he's also one of the better cover linebackers in the NFL in terms of range and man coverage ability. And then I've also got Levante David, who is consistently one of the most underrated linebackers in the NFL. He's not really underrated in the sense that like people don't know who he is. He's just underappreciated, and I thought he had another great season. On the defensive line, I'm going with Dexter Lawrence, who is the best nose tackle that I've ever watched. Not only is he a great run defender, but what he does rushing the passer from the nose tackle position, we've just never seen before. If you see any stat that's pass rushing productivity as a nose tackle, the top 2 on that list are going to be Dexter Lawrence this year and Dexter Lawrence last year. At his size, it's just rare to have that quickness and explosiveness and pass rushing moveset, and I'm not even splitting it by nose tackle 3 technique. He deserves to make it regardless. And then Aaron Donald amazingly had yet another all-pro caliber season, like 33 years old, and he still leads defensive tackles and pressures by 17. He had 84 pressures and 10 sacks this year. It's not as relentless every single snap like it was back 3 or 4 years ago, but he's still a guy that you're up at night worrying about as an offensive coordinator, and he's consistently drawing 2 or 3 blockers, opening up opportunities for other people. Quinnen Williams only had 4 sacks, but I thought he was a really disruptive pass rusher and one of the best run defenders in the NFL this year. He's an example of how sometimes you can be winning as a pass rusher and it just doesn't translate into sacks, especially if you're the main guy that the offense is keying in on. And then I debated including Derek Brown here, but I'm going to go with Justin Madubuike for the Ravens. He leads defensive linemen in sacks this year. Some of them have been stunts and pursuit sacks, but he's also winning as a pass rusher, and he's just so explosive. He's the perfect scheme fit for their defense. All right, moving on to edge rusher. There's 4 players here in total. Honestly, they all 4 had good enough seasons to deserve making first team All-Pro, but I am going to go with Myles Garrett as my first edge rusher. He just completely changes the offense's protection plan. They're going to send 2 or 3 blockers his way, and there's a set time that the quarterback has to get rid of the ball because Myles Garrett is inevitably closing in on the pocket. And Garrett also really stepped up as a run defender this year. He's always been kind of a pass rushing specialist. I don't know if he takes plays off in run defense. He just doesn't make that that much of an impact, but he was much more of a positive force in that phase this season. And then my other first team edge rusher is Micah Parsons. A lot of similar things to say about him. He just wrecks game plans. You just pull the string on his back, put him on the field. He's guaranteed to get 8 pressures a game. His quickness and explosiveness is obvious, but his ability to generate power at his size is what's most impressive to me. He got a sack on Lane Johnson. He made Penei Sewell look average. It doesn't matter the level of competition. He's going to get to the quarterback. And then my second team edge rushers are going to be TJ Watt and Max Crosby. Watt's having one of his best seasons as a pass rusher. The Garrett Watt debate is so toxic. I don't want my praise of Myles Garrett to be taking anything away from TJ Watt. And then Max Crosby, only edge rusher to play over 1,000 snaps. He's so powerful, really skilled with his hands, and somehow just relentless effort given that he never leaves the field. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and also follow us on all of our social medias. The links to those are in the description. On to the offense. We're going to start up front. My first tackle is going to be Trent Williams. It's kind of amazing how skilled and athletic he is, but how casual he makes everything look. He's one of those players, along with Tyron Smith, where it just doesn't even look like they're trying out on the field, but they're still executing everything at a high level. His subtle, crafty hand usage, especially as a run blocker, is so impressive. He's probably the best offensive lineman at backside cutoffs on zone runs that I've ever seen. And I would say this year was maybe a slight step down from like peak Trent Williams, but that's still enough to be a first team All-Pro. And then my second offensive tackle is going to be Penei Sewell. He really took that next step this year into being an elite offensive tackle. He's a mauler in the run game, but like Trent Williams, he can get out in open space like a fullback. When it comes to run blocking with just like subtle hand usage along with the movement skills, I really do see a lot of similarities between Trent and Sewell. He's been really good in pass pro. He's great at the snatch trap technique, which if you don't know, when a power rusher's leaning into you and they're overextending, the snatch trap is when you release contact, slam them on their face. I still think he has room for improvement there. Like I said, the Micah Parsons matchup was still a mismatch, but the crazy thing is he's only 23 years old. There's going to be tackles drafted this year that are older than him, and I expect him to continue to develop well into his second contract. And then for my second team, I'm going with Lane Johnson and Tyron Smith. Lane Johnson's just out on an island every snap, and year after year, he's one of the 2 best right tackles in the league. And Tyron Smith missed some games, but I honestly think he's playing at his peak in pass protection. He gave up his first sack of the year to Aiden Hutchinson in week 17, but outside of that, he's just been shut down. At guard, I went with Joe Tooney, one of the best pass blocking guards in the NFL. So quick with his hands, good anchor. He's a heat-seeking missile out in open space. And then my other guard is going to be Chris Lindstrom, who I think is hands down the best run blocking guard in the NFL. He's got more pancakes on his tape than anyone else I've ever seen. The Falcons scheme does protect him a little bit as a pass blocker. He doesn't have as many difficult assignments as some other guards, but he's still really good in pass protection. He's undersized, but he does a lot to offset that disadvantage. He's really good with his jump set, where he's taking the fight to the pass rusher, getting hands on him early. The only blemish on his tape this year was his week 1 matchup with Derek Brown and then a couple reps against Jeffrey Simmons. And then Tyler Smith, I was debating putting on my first team. It's still kind of rough around the edges. There are times where he gets off balance in pass pro, and he still just has so many penalties. 16 penalties this year after having 19 as a rookie. But judging off the high-end flashes and the improvement that he's shown from his college tape to his rookie year and then rookie year until now, I think he's going to be one of the best guards in the NFL pretty soon. And then Quentin Nelson had a bounce back year along with the rest of the Colts offensive line, so he's going to be my second team guard. And then I mentioned there were 3 really difficult positions. The first 2 were cornerback and safety. The third is center. Ryan Kelly and Jason Kelsey I gave strong consideration, but they didn't make the cut this year. My first team center is going to be Frank Ragnow for the Detroit Lions. The difference in their offense when he's on and off the field is as extreme as any player in the league. At his size, his balance and lateral fluidity, zone blocking ability is incredible. And doing my preparation, I ended up going through every Detroit Lions game because I enjoyed his and Penei Sewell's film so much. And then second team is going to be Tyler Linderbaum. He was an elite run blocker, especially in zone from the minute he stepped on the field. And this year he's taken a major step forward in pass pro. His main issue last season was picking up stunts. I didn't notice that as much of an issue at all this year. And he really punches above his weight class as far as anchoring at 305 pounds. For receiver, Tyreek Hill is the obvious pick as wide receiver 1. He got injured and missed a few games, so he wasn't able to break the record, but still one of the most impressive individual seasons I've ever watched. He runs a pretty simple route tree in Miami's offense. It's either going to be those in-breaking glance routes that are kind of the staple of their scheme. He'll run vertical routes, and then sometimes he'll get the corner leaning so far back on their heels he can just cut it off to a deep out. He executes all of those at an extremely high level, doesn't really have to change it up that much to still be effective. And even though he might not have the skill or technical refinement of some of the other elite receivers, I still think he's the best receiver in the NFL. My second receiver, I'm absolutely shocked that he didn't make the Pro Bowl, but it's going to be Brandon Ayuk. Now, I know I'm a lot higher on Brandon Ayuk than most people. I think Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, my third receiver, which I'll spoil, is going to be CeeDee Lamb, and then Justin Jefferson, who didn't make it because he's injured. I think those four are the top 4 receivers in the NFL right now, and Ayuk specifically, I just can't say enough good things about his game. He's one of the most crisp route runners in the NFL. There's just no wasted motion in and out of his breaks. It's almost like he's playing in slow motion, and he has every single step of every single route perfectly planned. He's untouchable at the line of scrimmage. Teams don't really try to press him anymore, and the 49ers don't face that much press man, but whenever he gets press coverage, he just tears it up almost instantly. His one issue last season is that he had a slight drop issue, and he wasn't as good in contested catch situations as you would expect for a receiver of his size. This year he only has 2 drops, and he's catching 58% of his contested catch opportunities, and after being in the doghouse for his blocking early in his career, he's developed into probably the best run blocking receiver in the NFL. So I understand I'm probably as high on Brandon Ayuk as anyone, but to me it's a situation where the tape doesn't lie and the stats don't lie either. The volume isn't insane. He only has 1,317 yards, but him and Tyreek Hill are the only receivers to have above 3 yards per route run this year. And then my third receiver is going to be CeeDee Lamb. He's the perfect example of what you want in terms of development for a first round pick or any draft pick. He's basically developed like a Madden player. He's getting +5 overall every season. Every season of his career, he's improved in yards per route run. He's improved in drop rate. He's had more receiving yards. He's had more touchdowns. He's had a higher PFF grade if you're into that sort of thing. His movement as a route runner is so awkward, which to me is one of the best things you can say about a receiver. There's no consistent rhythm to how he stems his routes. From a cornerback's perspective, you're just always off balance. It's really difficult to get a read on where he's going, and then he cuts everything off and breaks so quickly. It makes him one of the best slant route runners in the NFL, but like he runs everything. He's a vertical threat. He can beat press coverage. He wins from the outside. He wins from the slot. It's funny, thinking back to when Dak Prescott was the favorite to win MVP, the argument was always that Brock Purdy has these elite weapons and a great scheme, and so he can't win MVP because his supporting cast is so good. And I wouldn't have had Brock Purdy as MVP, but the guy that we're comparing him to is Dak Prescott, and he's throwing the ball to CeeDee Lamb. He's being protected by Tyler Smith. In that whole conversation, it always felt like people were ignoring the great players that the Cowboys have on offense. And then my third team is going to be Mike Evans, AJ Brown, and DJ Moore. AJ Brown was definitely on a path to be first team early in the season, kind of cooled off over the second half. DJ Moore, just what a heist by Ryan Poles to get him in that trade. The one thing that's keeping him out of first team is that it feels like his production is pretty highly concentrated in a few big games. And then Mike Evans, I think, is one of the more underrated route runners in the NFL. He's not super explosive or fluid, especially at this stage of his career, but at his size, to be able to get in and out of breaks so quickly, it just makes him a really difficult cover. First team tight end is very easy. George Kittle is probably the best receiving tight end at this point and the best run blocking tight end in the NFL. The blocking that the 49ers get from their skill positions is incredible. And then second team, I actually went with David Njoku. Really turned it on over the second half of the year, and I originally had Travis Kelce when I was kind of planning out my list, but he's kind of disappeared in some key moments and key games over the second half of the season. And David Njoku, I think, has burst onto the scene as one of the best tight ends in the NFL. He's been a big reason for the Browns' 4-game winning streak. At running back, I'm going with Christian McCaffrey on my first team. Don't expect a lot of pushback there. Not only is he an elite receiving back, I actually think he's improved as a between the tackles runner. He's averaging 3.42 yards after contact per attempt, which is by far the highest of his career, and he's just a lot more decisive and powerful running inside. I'm sure part of that's that he's getting better blocking and San Francisco. But yeah, elite season from Christian McCaffrey. And then Raheem Mostert's going to be my second team running back. Finally had a healthy season. This was his first year with over 200 rushing attempts, and he put up the kind of production that I think he's always been capable of. And then my first team quarterback is going to be Lamar Jackson, and this is a good segue into the awards because he's also going to be my MVP. Now, he doesn't have the raw stats and production that you would normally think of for an MVP, but watching his tape almost every week, I feel like he had one of the biggest discrepancies between box score stats and quality of play. The extreme example was the Steelers game from week 5, where he threw 236 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, and it was one of the best quarterback performances of the season. He had 7 drops, including a couple that would have been touchdowns. I think at this point in his career, he really has the ability to be any type of quarterback that the Ravens need in that exact moment. He's turned into an elite pocket passer, decisive, accurate, great decision maker working over the middle of the field. He's one of the best quick game quarterbacks in the NFL. He can break out of the pocket and extend plays, keep his eyes downfield, make difficult throws on the run. And then he's also got the rushing ability that he wasn't leaning on as much as he was early in his career, but it's still a dangerous weapon that he has at his disposal. Now, I will say, I think he might be winning MVP for kind of the wrong reasons. This idea of like Brock Purdy's the MVP favorite, and then Lamar Jackson comes in and quote unquote beats him, and then now Lamar Jackson's the MVP. I just disagree with that, but anything to get away from just going on ESPN, sorting by touchdowns, and giving that person MVP, I'm in favor of. So moving on to the awards, like I said, Lamar Jackson is going to be my MVP. Now, I've made it this far without complaining about the award system. I will go on a brief tangent here. The idea of having the main award be most valuable player just makes no sense to me. If we're going to do most valuable player, just ask Vegas who would impact the spread more if they were out with an injury and give it to that person. And there's no reason to have an award that theoretically could be won by all positions, but since we call it most valuable player, that's always going to be a quarterback. They just need to have a most outstanding player award that could go to any position, and then have a best player award for each position like they do in college. But anyways, my offensive player of the year is going to be Tyreek Hill. I think you could make the argument for Christian McCaffrey, but to me, Tyreek Hill was the most dominant player in the NFL, regardless of position. My defensive player of the year is Myles Garrett. Like I said, I just don't think there's a defender in the NFL that wrecks teams' game plans more consistently. And then coach of the year is a tough one. I think Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, and Shane Steichen all deserve shout outs. And I don't think this award should just automatically go to the person that exceeds expectations the most. Like if you go 9-8 with a bad roster, I don't think you should just be handed coach of the year, but the quality of players that you have access to should be factored in. And for that reason, I'm going with Kevin Stefanski. Not only are they winning with backup quarterbacks, but he's adjusting his offensive scheme based on what backup they have in. And they're having all of this success without an efficient run game, which has normally been kind of their staple. Obviously, Nick Chubb's out for the season with an injury. He does have elite defensive personnel and a really good defensive coordinator, but orchestrating that offense with the personnel that he has and kind of galvanizing the whole team to believe that they can be a playoff contender, I think he deserves coach of the year. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL players or teams that you'd like me to cover.